righty. We will officially call ourselves to order, and you all are ready and waiting.
So, first of all, you'll note that we did post a slightly revised version of the, after it went out, Ms. Mahaffey posed a question that had us revise a slide or two here.
Is this the revised?
Yeah, it's posted online, but we also had a request for a paper copy, so if you want one, we give you one.
We have some old school folks here.
So today we are continuing the discussion of the draft 3 proposal that came at the last work session. Staff has made some modifications. We got some public input, additional through a meeting, as well as the online comments that have continued, and of course the emails. And so we're bringing sort of a revised version, and at this point, once we go through everything that's in there, we're looking at sort of the compilation of what's made it through draft 1, draft 2, and then whatever decision is left at draft 3 today. That will be the enrollment proposal that we will bring to the board for a decision at the first board meeting in December. Just as a point of reference, we do also have the public hearing this evening.
All right. So just as Kathy mentioned, we've got the feedback that we'll present from the draft 3, the public meeting. We've also got the pending decisions with regards to Buckhorn Creek and the calendar feeder pattern alignments. We'll review the new schools and the base attendance areas for each of those, and then we'll recap some of the previous draft 3 recommendations that staff had made. Okay? So going to the public meeting that we had at Holly Springs High School on November 13th.
You will recall that at draft 3, the main items of discussion were a request from the board to bring some options for what it would look like to align the calendar feeder patterns in that part of the county. We brought one option that was a smaller option and another option that was a bigger option. There was not an option for the entire district, but even the bigger option staff felt was way too much to try to implement at this time. Option 1 could possibly be done, and the board directed us to get additional feedback from the community, so that's where we are.
Okay. And so based on that option 1 recommendation, we had presented that to the public. First, we had sent out emails to approximately 2,700 families that lived in the affected areas. That's not affected students, but students who live in the affected area that are enrolled in school. We received 207 RSVPs of families that would attend the event, and that's about how many showed up. The basic feedback in the next 3 slides, we'll talk about the actual feedback we got from the parents that evening. The basic feedback that we got from them was they're not in favor of aligning the elementary middle school calendars. That's because they prefer community-based schools. They choose to have proximity over the calendar alignment is what we heard from them that evening. And then also we heard from the Buckhorn Creek families who prefer to open that school as a year-round calendar. So those are the 3 major takeaways we had from that particular evening. Like I said, here were the pros and cons. So question 1 we had posed to families, and this is all of the feedback that was given. What are the pros and cons of leaving the assignments as they currently are? Meaning our 17, 18 assignments as they are right now, what are the pros and cons the way they are? Families have misaligned calendars in elementary and middle school. And then question 2 was, what are the pros and cons of aligning the calendars? This is using option 1 as a guide. So if we tried to align calendars between elementary and middle school, that would have students changing their middle school assignments to align the K-8 calendars for families. And what are the pros and cons of that?
I will say that the feedback, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know why we expect anything any differently, is that it was hard for the families who were impacted, and that's why they were there, to go beyond the level of the question simply as it affected their family, right? So I think that
Not a theoretical.
It was not a theoretical discussion. They were very invested, very engaged. They were passionate feeling about it. And so you can see that their answers came from their particular situation and how it would impact them.
I think there is a voice missing here, and that's the folks who are currently in traditional. They're being signed to Buckhorn. Doesn't appear to show up here.
I'm not sure that any of them attended the meeting.
Well, they had no reason to,
Right.
in terms of going to Buckhorn. It's going to be traditional. Didn't know there'd be any other change. So
is loud and clear what we heard from Fuquay residents especially.
It's not on the page, I think it though it is worthy of remembering.
Agreed. Thanks, Mr. Fletcher.
And then this question 3 was just any additional questions or comments that families had provided us on the post-it. So we had large pieces of paper for them to separate between pros and cons for each question, and then they had an option to just give us any additional info. So for Buckhorn Creek in draft 3, we've got 2 items that we'd like to keep from draft 3. One of them is this Parker Point subdivision. We had talked about how they were assigned to Lincoln Heights, but they were landlocked with regards to getting out of that development and driving through the base attendance areas of another school. And so what we did was in draft 3, we had proposed that Parker Point go from Lincoln Heights to Herbert Akins, and we're recommending to keep that move as we move forward to our final draft.
And I thought that subdivision emptied out on the 42 West, which is the same street that connects to Lincoln Heights.
It does. That's correct.
So I don't understand it's landlocked and it has to go through the assignment area of another school.
Yep, so here is the section right in here. And so here's Parker Point, and then this development right here that they have to get out to is assigned to Herbert Akins. I want to say it's like Charleston Southern or something. I can't remember the exact name of the subdivision, but they were assigned to, in draft 2, they were assigned to Herbert Akins, this whole area here. And so we had a dilemma. We could either send them to Fuquay, keep them at Lincoln Heights, or send them to Herbert Akins. And so based on the numbers and the fact that, they would be leaving they would be leaving Lincoln Heights, and this would be the only bus that would have to come in through there, pass through the other neighborhoods to go get those students only in that neighborhood to go to Lincoln Heights.
So transportation is making the decision for us.
No, transportation did not make the decision. This was to align neighborhoods, even though they're not the same neighborhood, they have the same exit point, and so.
Okay, all right.
That group was already.
I disagree, but I respect your.
Where are they currently
opinion.
assigned?
Aren't they currently to,
Currently at Fuquay.
they're currently at Fuquay? Okay. I thought the original maps looked like they might have still been, it might have been at Herbert Akins.
There's a close-by portion that is assigned to Herbert Akins.
And this is a change from draft 1.
This is a 1 to 2 draft.
Well, Parker
This
Point
change
is
is
from
made.
draft 2 to draft 3.
Okay.
Okay, all
We
right.
had corrected this in draft 3. Okay? And then also in draft 3, we had proposed for Buckhorn Creek families that had Holly Grove Elementary as a year-round application school. We added an additional application school for them, that being Holly Springs, so that parents had an additional choice other than just the CAP school of Holly Grove Elementary to apply to during their year-round application period.
We talked about at one time having some either regional or, if we capped out, sequential capping. Is that still in the works? Or is it really, can go either place? And then because I'm looking for transportation efficiency.
So we have some of both, I believe. In some cases, when there's more than one school listed for the parents to apply to, it's based on your address. And we do have some of that, so that there's a portion of a base attendance area that has a choice of that school. And the other section of the attendance area, it's a different school. But I think in this particular case, we were looking at an additional overflow for the entire area should Holly Grove Elementary, because it's going to be capped, not have sufficient space.
So that's my question. The additional overflow, is that going to be a sequential, or is that going to be, I can start right now applying to both?
No, after Holly Grove fills, right?
Holly Grove
No,
is full.
they could apply to both.
Okay.
It wouldn't be, once all the seats are filled, they could apply to both. Parents will see those 2 choices to select during the application.
Mr. Fletcher, then Ms. Cooper.
I want to ask 2 questions. Are we going to discuss the calendar, a different calendar for Buckhorn Creek? And does that not inform all of the rest of this discussion?
That was my question.
Yes, it will.
And then has the staff believe Highway 55 is so dangerous that we can't cross a bus can't cross it?
No, I think a bus could cross it. I think what we're presenting here is based on the current version of what's in draft 1, 2, and 3. This is what we would be proposing. Once we get to the section where we need to have a discussion around Buckhorn Creek and its calendar, that will then in turn inform if there are changes that need to be made to this.
Okay, so the Highway 55 is not a divider between North Holly Springs and South Holly Springs so far as our assignment planning is concerned. That's a question.
Are you talking about between particular schools?
There were several parents who were adamant that Highway 55 was too dangerous to have carpools cross or to have buses cross. Have we adopted that language, or are we expecting that professional drivers can cross that road and parents can navigate it?
We have attendance areas
Yeah,
that are on
attendance
either
areas.
side of 55.
I'm just-
Okay.
I think part of that was in shifting a calendar was, vast more people and buses going and crossing, not calendar choice.
Thank you.
Okay. So another piece of draft 3 that we'd like to incorporate, well, first we talked about taking away the draft 1 and 2 options, which are here on slide 8. Based on the feedback that we had heard from families, we felt it was best to just withdraw options 1 and 2 from draft 3 of the enrollment plan. But going back to slide 7 here, there is a portion that we would like to keep. And because in draft 1 and 2, this neighborhood here, or there's a bunch of neighborhoods here, we're assigned to Apex Middle School. And so based on some of the feedback we had heard from families, they prefer a more proximate school. We felt that this could be a win-win for both the proximity piece, where now we would assign them to Lufkin Road, and it also assigns them to the same calendar with their elementary, which would be Holly Springs Elementary. So in essence here, if we keep this portion of what is currently the Holly Ridge Middle School base, in drafts 1 and 2 is assigned to Apex Middle School. That provides them a mismatched calendar between elementary and middle. And now we are proposing to assign them to Lufkin Road Middle School, which would be a calendar alignment for K-8 for these families.
And that provides relief to Holly Ridge and also keeps Apex Middle under 100%
Correct.
capacity, and Lufkin keeps Lufkin's numbers up and also provides them a more proximate.
That is correct.
And these families are coming from Holly Springs Elementary,
Holly Springs Elementary base, that is
which
correct.
is year-round.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And these were families that were already in the proposed move in draft 1 and 2. It's just a different move.
Okay.
So that's the only part of draft 3 that you're
Other than the
recommending?
Parker Point move and yes, that is
So those are
correct.
the only three, otherwise,
Calendar alignment moves, yes.
so draft 3, other than those 3 small changes, you're recommending that we not adopt draft 3?
That's correct.
Options 1 or 2? Yeah.
That's correct.
For clarifying, Ms.
Okay,
Commissioner.
just, I have trouble. Okay, thank you. I think you'll
And
find.
if I may just say that, a big driver in this was really the timing of how all of this came up. I think that's important to say because, it was draft 3, but the ongoing conversation and need to review calendar alignment in that part of the county and other parts of the county remains. And so staff will begin to look at that more deeply after the holiday winter break. So that by the time we come back to you, we may be coming back to you earlier than usual in terms of priorities for the next plan to go ahead and start having some discussions about the 1920 school year, providing more time for both families to provide feedback and notice around any kind of changes that may happen.
That would be ideal.
That would be wonderful.
Ms. Kutcher?
Well, and I do think, given the comments we got back, as Mr. Fletcher pointed out, there's one comment, make all schools year-round. There's another comment, make all schools traditional. There's several comments that have similar contradictions. So we, as much as I don't want to spend a year talking about student enrollment, it seems as though we do need to spend a good chunk of time talking about our philosophies, explaining to the community what our core values are in our student enrollment policy, which is on, another, an updated version on the action agenda for tonight. So I think we're poised to do that work, and glad to wait till after the holidays. But I appreciate the staff's detailed work that y'all already have done on this plan, and I have confidence we're going to keep making better decisions. Thank you.
And somewhat related to the earlier discussion, in the heat of the moment, the community input was all about what happens to my current situation. I think for us to actually have the theoretical discussion that we need to have, starting early makes sense, but I'd encourage us to go ahead and have some community engagement,
Yes.
possibly with the PTA leaders, possibly with broader community leaders, and let's start that early. So thank you.
Yes, to all of that. I mean, I concur that it might not be our desires to spend a year on student enrollment, but I think it will benefit our decision-making, but our community as well. Not only do they hear our core values, we actually get to showcase. I mean, I think it's important, and I've said this to most parents, and I know many of you have as well, for as much as you believe in what you're asking me, so does somebody else. And so for us, I think this is our opportunity to relay this feedback in the way that we've captured it, but then allow people to give feedback. Because I think for most of us, we're making a decision for my child or my children in my house versus really looking at the big picture. And so while it may be time-consuming, I think it'll be beneficial for us to be able to be engaging with people about the impact of student enrollment on all of our families. Easier said than done.
So here we're now going to summarize the feedback from drafts 1, 2, and 3 with regards to the new schools opening. On these particular slides, we've got each of the schools that are opening, and then the D1, D2, D3 represent the draft that we had settled on with regards to the attendance area for these particular schools. All right? So we're proposing to approve the base attendance areas for South Garner High School and E46, the YMCA school, according to the draft 1 assignment proposal that we had put out. And then Bryan Road based on the draft 2 maps we had presented. And then Buckhorn Creek and Apex Friendship based on draft 3. And just to clarify, it would be draft 3 as of today.
Okay, just those three.
Those, just the changes you just told us about.
Right.
Okay. I know you're trying to keep us straight, but.
Okay, so looking at Bryan Road, this is the base attendance area here. You see Bryan Road is here in the yellow, okay? We had changes in multiple schools in this particular area, and we're looking at approving the base attendance area for Bryan Road and the surrounding schools based on draft 2. Did you have any questions about this particular school and the base attendance areas that we had presented according to draft 2?
This is the draft 2 map.
That is correct.
And Bryan Road is opening traditional or year-round?
Traditional.
Traditional.
So here are the capacity numbers and the academic proficiency numbers based on that. Again, this is according to the draft 2 maps that we had presented. Would you need another minute with this, or would you like me to move on?
I remain concerned about Creech Road. I can't recall if we've come up with any better proposals for Creech.
Probably not.
Long-term, while assignment may have a role to play with Creech, I think Creech requires a lot of other attention and investment. I don't think assignment is the first place to go to address those challenges. Yeah.
Elementary support model school.
And I think they just have looked at, they're just getting to, starting to look at, I don't know if they're restart yet or not. Is Creech
They were not on the
restart?
list yesterday, but
No, but I think they are,
They're doing too well to be a restart school.
doing too well to be
Right.
restarts.
so, but.
And I know
But
we're.
that doesn't mean we don't need to give some of the same
I
kind of
think-
support.
Right, I think
Right.
the fact that it's not being affected by an enrollment plan does not mean we're not paying attention to
Right.
Creech Road.
Right.
And so I'm glad to lift that up. Thank you.
I mean, related to that, I mean, I think we've allowed the state to define things like restart schools maybe more than we should. And maybe we need to look at some schools and say, hey, we're not just waiting for the state's crazy definition to take action. We can't obviously get the restart priorities, but there are things that we can do.
Yeah, and I think you'll hear more when we complete the presentation from yesterday's Student Achievement Committee that we didn't get to the ESM part. So when we bring that back at the next Student Achievement Committee, we can delve into what ESM is providing the schools and have a discussion there. Because there is an evaluation model that's going with ESM. This is the third full year of implementation, so about a year from now, we'll be looking at what kind of a decision we need to make moving forward.
Thank you.
So looking at Buckhorn Creek Elementary, staff's recommendation would be to approve the attendance area for Buckhorn Creek and the surrounding schools as presented in draft 3. Again, just to highlight, that would be including the Parker Point move that we had suggested we keep from draft 3, the earlier version of draft 3.
And where is that section?
That is right down here.
Ms. Wagner.
So I appreciate that we're going to have the discussion about possibly opening this school as year-round. One of the things that has come up multiple times is the development that's going up across the street. Where is that in terms of our capacity numbers and how has that been brought in? And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a lot of homes coming in.
So our projected growth numbers are based on the information from the municipalities that's presented in the database that's given to Mike Miller. And so when we open new schools like that, we have all of that information in our database. So the numbers that you see there are projecting for those neighborhoods to be included in that area.
So then that's what's given to you by the planning department of the municipality, and so we have that.
Correct.
Okay.
So those 600 homes are already included in what we're expecting. So we have room at Buckhorn when, in fact, those families move in.
So the base attendance areas are drawn with those numbers that the municipality gives us about the additional homes with whatever that calculation is. You know, we hear before that there's like 2.1 children per household and that sort of thing. Those calculations, estimates are taken into account when we look at how we build the base attendance area and how the school will fill over the next few years.
So that's why we see it jumping from 84% utilization in next school year and then up to 92 for 2020, 2021, because those families would presumably be settled and
Start
a few
coming
more
in.
developments
They'll
would
start
be.
coming in.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
correct.
And what schools are we primarily, or are we, drawing from to fill Buckhorn?
So the impacted schools would be Holly Grove Elementary, Lincoln Heights Elementary. I believe there's a portion of Herbert Akins as well.
Based on our materials for version 1, there's a fair amount of Herbert Akins. And it's
I'm
all
sorry, yes,
portions
you are
of
correct.
Fuquay.
That southern
Right.
area, that is correct.
So all that southern area, a little bit of Fuquay.
Well, I think we cut that back, though.
This part is not as,
Oh, yeah, no, that
Yeah.
that part did get cut back.
Yeah.
That's right, we reduced it in draft 2.
Yeah, we reduced it in draft 2, and then
Right,
draft
so
3, we
basically
just
the
had
Herbert
took away the
Akins.
Parker Point
Moving
piece from
fewer.
Lincoln Heights.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Kennedy.
So what percent of these kids that we are reassigning to Buckhorn are in year-round elementary schools now?
Let's see, it's a high percentage. I can get you those numbers. But the majority of the students are from Herbert Akins and Holly Grove.
We're looking at 60, 80, 51%?
Let's give us a few minutes
Yeah.
to pull it up, and I think
But-
it's high.
But the majority of our reassignment into Buckhorn is coming from year-round elementary.
That's correct.
Yes. I think you may recall that when we did the community hearing, we used a couple of maps to show the families what the calendars were and the distribution of the schools in the area and the calendars. And I don't know if you would recall seeing that there are very few traditional calendar schools in this area. They are largely multi-track year-round. So it would stand to reason that when you open a new school, if you're inserting a traditional calendar school, it's likely going to draw from year-round schools in the area. And in this particular case, it's largely mostly. And we'll get the number, but and that just has to do with what's in the area already.
Well, there's supposed to be a significant portion of the Lincoln Heights, previous Lincoln Heights population that's going to Buckhorn, which would be changing calendar as part of the assignment.
There is a portion.
There is a portion.
Constant count.
That's it.
It would not be changing count.
They will be changing calendar, well,
Lincoln Heights to Buckhorn.
they're not changing calendar if Buckhorn is traditional. That's correct.
Yeah.
Ms. Mahavy?
Not sure why we're...
When we open, we've sat at this table for transfers. What are we looking at for folks that do want, not that we've heard from many of them, but for traditional calendar options, what is there in that area?
So the question is, what are the traditional calendar options should Buckhorn Creek open as a multi-track year-round with families?
And what are
That's-
the chances of getting into those? We're hearing, I kind of want to hear both sides. If it's traditional, we're hearing from families, what are my options and what's the likelihood that I can stay on my preferred calendar? Can we hear that for both multi-track and for year-round?
So the easier one to answer is if it opens as traditional calendar, the year-round options would be, depending on where you live, Herbert Akins or Holly Grove and Holly Springs, like we had mentioned earlier. If Buckhorn Creek opens as a year-round school, staff has a major dilemma with regards to what option schools or, calendar application schools that we could offer, because we do not have capacity at the local traditional calendar schools in this area. And you'll see this during the capping presentation as well. But in this particular area, you have Fuquay Elementary, Lincoln Heights, Oakview, which is up here, and Holly Ridge. Those are the only traditional calendar schools in this particular area. And as we look at, Fuquay is capped, Lincoln Heights is a magnet school, which we would not prefer to have students calendared to that as much as possible anymore. You're looking at Oakview, which is, we just added trailers to that campus to deal with the growth at that school. And then Holly Ridge is crowded and was recently capped. We just don't have traditional calendar seats. So there is a need for traditional calendar seats in this area, and that's why staff prefers to open this school as a traditional calendar. Just as when Oakview opened, a portion of that attendance area came from Holly Grove, which was year-round. Those families went to that school and filled it up. We expect the same thing to happen at Buckhorn Creek as well, because there is a demand for traditional calendar. We're just not hearing from those families at this time.
Because it's currently slated to open traditional.
Yeah, I see the dilemma of no traditional seats, and I also see the dilemma of moving kids out of multi-track in a high-growth area. It goes against a lot of what I wish we could do. What are the options for the people that want to stay in multi-track to stay at their school? Like, what would be the process? Are they all option out, mainly kids in those schools?
So if they are at Buckhorn Creek as traditional and they would like to apply for a year-round school, so we have selection criteria that they can apply during the magnet and year-round application period, which is January 12th through the 31st. We seat, based on the available seats we have at those schools, we'll seat students, and it's done strictly through a selection process, the criteria that we have set forth. So it's,
Will those kids be mainly, are those calendar option kids that are in those schools, or were they year-round application? They were,
It's a mix, probably.
we're
is that
currently
calendar
at Holly
option?
Grove.
Holly Grove doesn't currently have any calendar option students added.
These are all base students there.
All of these would apply to the year-round schools. And how would we feel as student assignment? Would we give them priority to get back out of a new Buckhorn Elementary, to get back into their year-round calendar?
We do not have it set up currently.
It's not, the priorities aren't set up around remaining on the same calendar. The priorities are set up around the things that we've done in the past, like siblings,
K-8 alignment.
K-8 alignment, which could work depending on, because there's a mismatch at the middle school, that's part of the concern in terms of why Buckhorn Creek, the discussion about whether it should open as traditional multi-track year-round. So if they have siblings in the middle school that is multi-track year-round, then they'll have a high priority if they're assigned to Buckhorn Creek, if they request a multi-track year-round school because of the K-8 alignment and with the sibling.
I guess for me, the difficulty is that's my question going both ways, right? I mean, because which we're waiting on the numbers, but either way, I'm agreeing just the opposite side of Ms. Cashin. We're changing families who are used to a calendar, and so we can't guarantee them that they could go back to, even in the case of traditional, because Fuquay Marina is capped. We don't want to overflow Lincoln Heights. It's a new magnet. So I guess what I'm saying is the difficulty is on both sides, no matter what we do in the school.
Can I also do?
That's why I'm waiting on numbers, but yeah.
Don't we, if they're trying to get out of year-round based to traditional, don't we give them more preference than if they're trying to apply into a year-round?
So
We don't get more opt-out a year-round to
So what we-
traditional than traditional to year-round?
what we've done is separated the application periods, so that if you are in a traditional and you're seeking multi-track year-round, that happens mid to late January, which is an earlier period. If you are in multi-track year-round seeking traditional, that happens in the second application period, which is in February, March.
Which is a transfer.
So if you
Yes.
don't get in during the year-round, they could apply for a hardship, and then
We don't use that terminology anymore.
Well, hardships
Can
can,
appeal.
They could appeal.
hardships can be part of the transfer, but it's not all,
It's a transfer request
right.
from one calendar to another in February.
The short answer to that is if they don't get in the January time period, they can apply again in the February, March time period and go through what was formerly the hardship now request for school transfer. That may include where they have a much broader opportunity to explain the circumstances that are driving their request.
Do you have some numbers for us, Glenn?
Yes, so to Buckhorn Creek Elementary, we have 153 students coming from Herbert Akins Elementary, 202 from Holly Grove Elementary,
say that again?
202 from Holly Grove,
Both of those are multi-track year-round.
Both of them are multi-track.
and then 70 students from Lincoln Heights. So that figures out to be 84% of the students coming from year-round.
That's helpful.
So my concern is the multi-track we're forcing into traditional. Because again, it's a high growth area. We want to utilize our seats. That's probably my biggest thing. How many of those kids are going to get to, what do you think? Are we going to be able to give a lot of them application back to multi-track?
I mean, it's tough to tell because a lot of it handles on parent choice. I mean, how many parents choose to go to a different school to give up their seat at the base school? So a lot of it just depends on how many seats we have available at the time. I mean, if you go by history, a lot of these students attend their base school. They don't give up their base school because they prefer proximate. So
That's the discussion that's been, Dr. Martin.
And while I fully recognize that the assignments that we're making, students are coming from these two predominantly year-round schools. However, for years, we have heard from parents in this area their desire for more traditional choice. And we've had that in some appeals, and we've so the decision we made to open Buckhorn Creek as traditional was based on that feedback that we heard from parents. And it's just like being in that room at Holly Grove, where one room was, we don't like year-round.
That's right.
The other room was, we want more year-round. I think it's who shows up, and having spent also time in Western Wake, where I have had many parents come and say, I want to go to a traditional school, but I've applied and I can't get in. So that's my great hesitancy of making Buckhorn year-round, because I don't want to get us restricted the same way we are in Western Wake, where there are parents who are at a year-round school, and they're telling me, and they're giving feedback that I'm only there because it's my base, and I'm making it work, but I really want a traditional calendar. And it's difficult for us to try to gauge there's never going to be a 100% solution, but I really think we need more balance in Holly Springs. So I really think it needs to stay traditional. That's just my point of view.
Ms. Mahaffey, sorry, did that.
I mean, overwhelmingly, what I've heard are from the folks who would like to stay in year-round. Very, very minimal from traditional. As it was stated, if you're happy with the result, you don't always speak up. But I just want to reiterate that overwhelmingly, I've heard from folks that they want to keep year-round.
Well, I was going to say basically the same thing that Ms. Kushner said. I mean, we have been approached with community feedback after community feedback after community feedback that there just are not enough traditional options west of 55. And it was that community feedback that led to the planning of Buckhorn Creek to be on the traditional calendar. And so I'm a little frustrated in some of the response, you're not listening to the community, because in fact, listening to the community is why Buckhorn Creek is being built on the traditional calendar. So I mean, I agree with you, Ms. Kushner, that we're not hearing from the traditional calendar people right now, but just because they have accepted the year-round calendar right now doesn't mean that is the preference. So I have not been able to see enough that tells me that the community feedback 5 years ago was any less valid than the current community feedback. There's clearly some preference both ways. We've got more year-round options than we do traditional options. That's why I think we need Buckhorn Creek on the traditional.
Ms. Mahaffey.
And it's frustrating because we're hearing from the families, like I said, overwhelmingly who want year-round. I'm hoping that as we move forward, we talked about more communication, more community input earlier on, that we can avoid this predicament that we're in the coming years, because I think we need to hear from all of the parents, not just the ones that are dissatisfied with a proposal.
Mr. Agee, then Ms. Kushner.
Well, on this Buckhorn Creek, it's from what I heard of the numbers that are being transferred out of year-round to fill this the first year, you're approaching 50% of the capacity. And just as Ms. Mahaffey said, there's been a lot of call for that to be year-round. Our overall seating shortage, year-round would help that some. And it looks like that if this is year-round, that we now have a geographic area of the county that becomes very dense at year-round. And I just tend to think that as you have more and more people in the year-round, just in their neighborhoods, they're going to attract one another to want the year-round. So the idea that we've got this area becoming very dense year-round, I think that's a good thing. If you can get it dense and get people, we've heard so many times people who didn't want it, once they start, it's like, oh yeah, I like this now. So, we got to not only bring them to the water, we got to get them to taste it one time.
Well, and I know there's been some discussion of the calendar, but I also recognize that the school is aiming to open on a traditional calendar, so the completion of the physical building is not going to be timed for anything but traditional. So I think given that we're going to be discussing year-round in the coming year, the thought of converting that calendar, but starting it as traditional and then holding open, talk to the parents that are there to talk about the calendar. But I also would love for us, as we discuss year-round, to see what capacity increases we're actually getting from the year-round system. I think that needs to be part of a bigger discussion in January, because to get that said 20% bonus seats, we need to have all 4 tracks fully loaded.
Right.
And we haven't looked at that data in a while, so I would welcome looking at the data to see where in our year-round programs are we getting that 20% bonus? Is it 10%? What are we truly getting in extra seating from the year-round programs as they are realized today in Wake County schools?
Mr. Fletcher?
Well, most of the multi-track schools in this part of the county are above the, if you want to use 20% as a goal, above that number.
Okay.
The exceptions are Ballantyne and Banks Road. And then if you want to push up to the middle school, Lufkin. So I think that is managed with an attention to creating a draw areas or assignment regions from which people who choose to go on the multi-track program will fill those schools. And where we are is in a crack between schools that were 100% by choice originally. The Westlake campus, for example, was 100% by choice. No one was assigned there originally. Then we had a small basis assigned to them. Then we went away from the choice application to being a matched calendar with another school, a different calendar with another school. And through that process, we've lost a good plan and the supporting structure to assure that the multi-track program is fully subscribed. So we're supplying additional resources at Ballantyne, and we're fully subscribed and got tremendous operational support at the other elementary schools in this area. So I think we've got a structural challenge to say we're going to put the multi-track schools on a different plane in terms of how we fill them and how we structure policy, not policy necessary, but how we apply policy around those schools and what choice looks like in those schools. Still being consistent with what our objectives are as a student assignment policy. But the closest year-round school might not be the closest school. So when you do that and you get to the density that Don talked about, the closest traditional school, the closest school might not be a traditional school either. And it's really showing up in this area. I'm sympathetic to the objective of opening this school on a multi-track calendar, and had suggested to staff a review of a potential strategy to do that. I don't know whether we've got a report on that or not. To just shoehorn the construction ahead a month is not practical.
So Joe has conducted, they've reached out to folks, neither a multi-track year-round opening, which would have to be completed sometime in June, or a single-track year opening, track 4, that would need to be completed for sometime early July to start at the end, 3rd, 4th week of July, is possible or guaranteed. So if there is
At that facility.
At that facility. So if there is if the board will is that it open multi-track year-round, it'll have to open somewhere else. Single-track year-round, it'll have to open somewhere else. Or the other notion that it open as a traditional, as we're conducting this review with an eye towards should it become multi-track year-round afterwards. Part of the reason that the families talked about the single track 4 was that it had a lot in common with the multi-track, with the traditional calendar. The single track 4 did, which then sort of makes you wonder: do you start as traditional and then, based on the review that's conducting, look at whether or not it should go multi-track year round? I mean, that's another option. You've got it's like 4 options on the table, right? Well, 3 options and then an extension, right?
So the bailiwick strategy is not an option. Opening it in a different location, such as Oakview or Lincoln Heights, and then moving it mid-August.
So we'd have to get into looking at how we would accomplish that. So depending on what you want to drive to be the driver here, if having a facility available and identified as a driver, we don't have that yet. We just know that we cannot guarantee that school is ready for a multi-track year-round opening or a single-track year-round opening. So if the decision is multi-track year-round is what we want, or even if it's single-track, staff would then have to get to work on figuring out where that would happen.
And I would not want to see it open as single track, because you'll never shoehorn people off of track 4. So it's traditional or multi-track, and then the question is, what makes sense for the district, and then what, and that's a long-term question, and then what makes sense for, what makes sense for the district, and what has the potential to respond to the community most effectively over time.
Ms. Mahaffey's had her hand raised for a while.
I was wondering if you could walk us through on the next slide the capacity numbers with and without the opening of Buckhorn, and what that looks like from the schools that we're pulling from.
What page are we going to be on?
Page 13.
Thank you. I went back to a prior
So
slide.
are you recommending to not open Buckhorn Creek at all? Is that
No,
what-
I'm just, I
like that. He's like, how did we get here?
Buckhorn Creek needs to open. I want to look at what the community would be looking at if we weren't having this discussion, and what we're looking at as far as capacity, even with Buckhorn Creek opening next year.
They would be without it.
Yeah.
They aren't even with it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the parents who attend Holly Grove Elementary, that school's been capped for quite some time. And so I think they're apparent of the crowding that's happening at that school and the growth in their areas. So, I mean, that's why we have Buckhorn Creek opening. I mean, it's in a high-growth area. The schools around it have been crowded for quite some time, so that's why we have those target circles, and we put the schools in those circles as best we can.
At one point, every elementary school in Holly Springs was capped.
Yes. So, looking at it from the current numbers without that school, Holly Grove Elementary would have a utilization of 147%. Without trailers, with trailers, it would be 138%. And then projecting that forward, 162 and 152. That would be without using Buckhorn Creek as some sort of relief for this area. Again, looking at Herbert Akins as well, they're at 111%. They actually jumped to 122% as well. I mean, so these schools really need relief, and Buckhorn Creek is that answer to that relief. It's always difficult when we open up new schools because somebody has to go to them. But there is a reason why we pick these locations and open these schools. So looking at Holly Grove after the move, so Holly Grove will be at 120% projected and 113 with trailers, 18, 19. And Herbert Akins will be at 114 in 18, 19, and then 125 in 2021.
And those assume that all the students that are assigned go.
Will go, that's correct.
So Herbert
Go to the new
Akins
school.
remains crowded.
Yes.
And Holly Grove remained crowded. Holly Grove gets, I think, the most relief, but even
Yes.
the others are not, they're filling right back up.
You ready?
I agree with Mr. Agee on the fact that if you've got a lot of growth in an area, you might have the most density, if not all, of multi-track in that area, because that's what multi-track does. It handles growth without putting funding into new schools constantly. However, I hope that we're not thinking that we would open this traditional and next year change it to multi-track the following year, after we've already moved multi-track people out of multi-track in traditional and then move them back. And I also hope that we're not thinking that this school will be at 100% capacity in 2 years, and we're going to try to recruit them to the multi-tracks that they just left. So those are my two concerns because of capacity over here. That's what I'm worried about, is capacity and overcrowding a school and then changing something to multi-tracks that we changed to traditional.
I can't remember. I think Dr. Martin's in the queue, then you.
Two
Okay.
quick questions. One is, we hear everything about the facility being ready. What is our staff hiring time frame? Have we started the hiring of people for Buckhorn Creek? Are they, I mean, obviously the principal
Principal position is posted.
is posted.
The principal is not supposed to start till February or March, I think.
Okay.
I can't remember one or the others.
But the principal position posted is for a traditional
Yes,
calendar
that is
principal.
correct.
And so would we then not have to, if we opened it as year-round, would we not have to repost? Because would we not likely get a different set of applicants for year-round versus traditional principal?
It's probably still posted. We would want to notify the candidates that have submitted a letter or their materials is interested already to let them know that it is in fact changing from what was anticipated.
But you don't see that as it being part of the time issue? I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just trying to clarify.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, not necessarily. It does.
That or.
Right.
Okay. So then the second question, comment is, we heard very clearly, the push for community proximity. There's a lot of talk about neighborhood schools or community schools. Some of that is mythology in terms of description. Some of that is a real idea. The one thing that I haven't really heard talked about as much as I think it needs to, if that is a priority, which I've heard that it is. A challenge with multi-track calendars is that you can have, 6 kids in a neighborhood on 4 different calendars. Right? There's nothing that ties geography and calendar. And so it hasn't surfaced in this conversation because of, I think, a lot of other drivers, but in other conversations I have heard it as one of the reasons why traditional is preferred. And so I'm trying to balance the whole, if I want my community together, if I want all the kids in my same street going to the same school, that usually means also going on the same calendar. And multi-track, by definition, is going to split that up. So how does that factor into the community request for keep our community together?
Well, I think what we heard was that folks had done their best to apply out of, for example, Holly Springs to get to Holly Ridge Elementary. And then they ignored what we considered a safe walk zone and walked their kids across Holly Springs Road to get them to Holly Ridge Elementary or Holly Ridge Middle. And that therein is part of the challenge, is that the voluntary student movement that we support is in fact really a complicating factor in unraveling this calendar match puzzle. So folks who should be at Holly Springs Elementary on multi-track have managed to get to the traditional calendar. So when their assignment for middle school says, we want you to go to Holly Grove Middle, which makes perfectly good sense,
Geographically.
they say, oh no, we're over here at Holly Ridge on a traditional calendar and we really like it. And when their elementary school is on their multi-track calendar. And so it's our choice has created some of this tension.
Absolutely.
Parents accessing the choice that we have has created some of this tension.
But that also reinforces that even though we haven't heard it with this specific opening of Buckhorn Creek, there still is a lot of demand for traditional in that area.
Right.
I haven't heard.
That's why Buckhorn Creek was slated to open traditional. It was not the board making a decision. It was, well, we did, but it was being responsive to a community request.
Yes, and the difficulty is, which I'm going to move to you, Ms. Hartensteiner, because we'll just keep going with this one, we also know there's a lot of distinctions of why you haven't heard. One, because they're already in traditional, so they just or think they're slated to go to traditional. Why would they call us? That makes sense for them. We wouldn't be only thing we'd be disrupting is their school, which they knew, because guess what? They've been able to look and see that school coming out of the ground, and we said it was traditional. The other piece, that the one lone person who did stand up, and I'm saying this because I represent the bulk of Fuquay, is she was the only person in there from Fuquay that said, hey, I actually expect a traditional school because that's where we're coming from. And we know Fuquay Elementary is capped and all the things we've talked about. So we've had this conversation. This is going to be the last time, hopefully, at this table, because I do think it warrants the larger conversation, because we know that choice has created this, but at the same time, we also know, as we said to the parents that came to the community meetings, it's not beneficial to the folks who don't show up that we take a vote, because the reality is there's hundreds, actually thousands, of parents who didn't physically show up. And so to say that they don't exist, we all know may not be true. So I don't want us to make those assumptions for people who were not present.
So
Ms.
how do we move,
Sorry, go ahead.
how do we move through this pinch point to come to a recommendation of what's going to go to the board for final approval in December?
So I think, for me, Ms. Cash expressed, so Ms. Moore gave us kind of the options, 3, I think, solid options. And Ms. Cash expressed for her some core values around that decision, which I will readily say, one, I agree with. I do not want to, actually both of them I agree with. I don't want to open a school and change the calendar next year. I mean, I don't even understand why we would do that, given we have consistently heard from people, don't do something to me this year and change it in 12 months. I think we can all agree that that is a consistent message no matter what the changes we're making. And then the other piece, which I think both of you may have said it, Mr. Fletcher, we will not get people off of track 4 if we open it as a single track. So that's Monica's opinion. And I do think that's how we make the decision is, as board members, we have to say, here are the things that we believe, and I think that'll help narrow down the decisions. I hope. Once we actually know what everybody's core values are, which I feel like the two of you and now myself have expressed.
I'll agree with both of those as well.
I'm sorry.
Either
It's
one
hard
makes
to
sense.
stop.
No sense.
I know. Agreed.
I'm the most patient.
I know you are, and I'm trying. Thank you, Ms. Hartstein. I'm sorry.
Mr. Cardoza, I have a question in y'all's thinking.
Sorry.
That's all right, no. When you were doing the proposal before my time, I think, for Buckhorn to be traditional, okay, knowing how overcrowded Holly Grove is, okay, what was your thinking in terms of why you didn't want to reduce, make Holly Grove's base area much smaller and increasing Buckhorn and opening as year-round? What made you think not to do that?
So from CIP 2013, we were directed that all schools with minus Pine Hollow would open as traditional calendar.
That was a board decision.
Okay.
And so that's how we start that scenario and looking at it. And so, the location of the school, the fact that you've got overcrowded schools in this particular area, we had to take students from Holly Grove because we cannot ignore Holly Grove base attendance area and allow them to continue at that school. It's been capped for quite some time, and it would continue to be capped for even longer had we not taken any students out of that attendance area. And just 2 years ago, we took some students out from that attendance area to go to Oakview, so you can see the impact in that particular area. So 2 years ago, they were hit to the north side of their attendance area, and now 2 years later, they're being hit to the south side, and they're still, projected to be crowded.
Yeah, so if we're going to think about opening it as a year-round school, it seems like we should be reducing the size of Holly Grove's base area so that we give them some relief and then we fill up at 120% capacity.
Let me translate.
Okay, translate.
There are currently 70 students assigned from Lincoln Heights Elementary to Buckhorn Creek in the draft proposal. They are currently expecting a traditional calendar school.
Right.
That if we change it would be new people to the table in terms of this discussion. There are another 50 students that are in a multi-track year-round elementary base in the Buckhorn Creek attendance area that are currently calendar optioned out to traditional calendar schools. That's an additional 50 families that we will be impacting based on a decision to open the school as multi-track year-round.
And they could
then
ask to come to Buckhorn, right? That are calendar opted out.
They would be assigned.
They would be assigned.
Yeah, and a lot of these are the constituents that are in the area that Ms. Johnson was talking about
Okay,
earlier.
all right.
And then with what you've just added would be a proposal to further reduce the base of Holly Grove Elementary in order to provide more students to fill Buckhorn Creek as a multi-track year-round calendar school, which would be an additional piece that's currently not on the table that
Right.
would need to be added in order to accomplish that.
And then you'd have the
And I'm not saying that
calendar
we-
options.
yeah.
No, I'm just asking for information, okay? I'm not proposing that.
And then that's another thing to consider. If we do change the calendar to year-round, now you've got students who would be assigned to that school, the opposite way, where you had some who were being assigned there because they're at their traditional calendar option, and now we would need to flip it with students who are assigned to their year-round option are now assigned there. So you just impacted many more families.
The dilemma that I can't say will continue to be circular because we don't actually know, because we've had to cap them out, calendar option them.
When you sent out your email to 2,700 families, those 2,700 families are the ones that would be impacted by going to Buckhorn?
Well, so no, they were impacted
Calendar.
K through 7 currently enrolled students in any of the attendance areas that we had talked about. So
Okay.
it was Holly Springs, the Lufkin Road area. It was a Middle Creek, I think, at one point.
And we heard from less than 10% of those.
Well, of the people who RSVP to attend,
200 attended, so.
that would be correct.
We don't know how many more we heard from online.
Yeah.
Well, somebody knows.
But we don't know how, the unduplicated number who
gotcha,
responded
yes.
online.
We have somebody looking into that to try and get that.
207.
Yeah. Did we get any additional feedback?
That was the
from
RSVP,
parents? That was
right?
just straight RSVP? Okay.
That number would be RSVP.
Oh,
No,
that's
that's not what
But in
I'm
terms
asking.
of, Granicus, in terms of the feedback, the whole plan feedback loop, we don't have a count.
We don't know
Right.
how many is
Right.
online only.
Right. It's a,
Because parents can post multiple times, so
Unduplicated,
you'd
right.
have to go through it.
absolutely.
That would be helpful.
So related to Ms. Hartenstein's comment, it was where it was also going, because if we would choose to open Buckhorn Creek on year-round, we would have to make additional assignments, which gets back to the late in the game, do we want to make additional reassignments at this time with two people who did not know that? My answer to that is no. If we would not make additional reassignments, then as planned, Buckhorn Creek is opening up at, we're estimating 84% capacity on traditional calendar. That would drop, would it not, to like mid-60s-ish % if it were year-round?
We'd have to calculate that.
But roughly, it's going to drop significantly. By 2020, we're to 92%. Again, if it were on the multi-track year-round calendar, that, with this current assignment, that would take it down, probably somewhere in the 80s. When we have multi-track year-round schools on that kind of a calendar, on that kind of a capacity, we have to supply a lot of additional resources so that
Right.
Yes.
we'd be left with, it strikes me, two options. One is a quite extensive cost, or additional reassignments that haven't even been talked about to date. And both of those strike me as not good options.
When we look at, I know there are no plans for trailers to go until we reach a certain percentage capacity, but is there room for trailers on that campus? And approximately how, how many trailers can that campus hold, or modulars?
4. Should be able to hold 4, but we'll have to check that.
Trailers or modular units?
Trailers.
Okay.
Ms. Fletcher?
Glenn, as a result of the plan as currently proposed, do we take the cap off of any of the elementary schools?
In this particular area, we would keep Holly Grove Elementary for one additional year. That's generally been our practice.
How about the Fuquay Elementary?
Same thing, we would want to wait an additional year just to see if we'd be able to.
So even by opening this school as a traditional school, we're not able to remove the cap from the traditional school?
Well, Fuquay is a little different because we've affected Fuquay in this plan with thinking ahead to E35. So this really wasn't supposed to be a direct impact on Fuquay, this school. The direct impact was supposed to be for Holly Grove Elementary.
But we reassigned kids to
It's
three.
But aren't we understanding correctly? The plan is to take the cap off, but be conservative and wait an additional year before doing so.
And so long as the enrollment's under the cap, no one's
Then
capped
nobody's
out.
capped
That's
out.
correct.
That's right.
So the,
That is correct.
okay.
And how many students are currently capped out of those schools?
We have the cap number. How many are capped out?
Which we actually don't know because we did make assignment changes. So technically, it's
Yeah.
active for the current assignment, proposed assignment.
Fuquay Marina has 6 students capped out as of the 15th of November.
And Holly
Holly
Grove.
Grove has 24.
So if they're not in the assigned area, they
Right.
could choose to go back.
Exactly. So back to the question at hand about how we get to your point. How do we pinpoint where we want to go with Buckhorn? And I guess several of us, so I'm asking a very direct question. What are your core beliefs around deciding whether this is traditional or year-round based on the options that staff have put before us? Or you may just know which one you want to go with, and that's what I want to know at this point. So, because we are at a place where we actually have to be giving some clear direction. Yes, that would be, we're going to have to. And I will say this out loud, several of you have mumbled it, there's no good decision here in terms of having heard from parents, in terms of what we know. So, what say you? That's right. The wind blowing stops here.
I think it's late to change it, and I think it's too late to change it from traditional to year-round.
Year-round.
Traditional because of timing and previous community input.
Okay.
I'm really on the fence. I see the benefit of both. I think there is a school that Buckhorn Creek opening was supposed to share benefit with, and that's Lincoln Heights. And because of that, I will lean toward the traditional.
Everyone else?
The feedback that I'm hearing from families is year-round. I also hear that it's very late to be switching that, but I'm disappointed that we didn't have this conversation earlier in the process.
Well, I feel backed into the corner here, definitely, and I think we have put ourselves into a fact that we have to do it traditional almost, but this goes against everything across the whole county of moving multi-track into traditional, and again, putting so much money into chasing growth with new buildings instead of calendar, and not renovating the old buildings with the money, that additional funding. I think we're just chasing growth. So I just feel backed into the corner with this one, but I'm on the fence too on that. I wish it could be multi-track, that would be my desire, but I see we're traditional. There's no place to go with the school right now, and we've left the traditional people out of the discussion, so I'm on the fence.
I'll add one more comment on the year-round item. I know we've heard that, we can't get it open for year-round. When we first started doing year-round schools, The idea of having a construction schedule for year-round wasn't really thought of, but it was possible to make it happen. And then there was a period where no matter what was planned for a school calendar, the construction schedule was set around to always be ready if year-round was the choice. And somewhere, apparently here from what I heard in 2013, that went away. But that looks like something that we need to have back on the table, to have all the construction schedules always be able to meet a year-round if that should be.
It dates back to 2009.
Yeah, I was about to say actually before me.
Well, that was in place for a number of years, for no matter what was decided for calendar, have them ready to be either.
I see your point.
And it has been done when planned to be traditional, and I mean switched later than this.
Yes. I don't
Yeah.
think that was well received, but
Well,
you're used
but it was able to be done.
Yes.
And I will say, back to what Ms. Mahaffey just said, so we are literally at the 11th hour, and this absolutely is a conversation that we could have, should have, would have had.
Except in fairness, we did. We've had this conversation.
I mean rushing the building schedule. That for me is different.
The specific in this calendar,
Yes,
we have
we
had, this has been an ongoing discussion as long as I've been on the board, in fact, longer than that.
That's why I said
Right?
it precedes
The
me.
mandatory year-round was not taken well by this county. And there's been a strong push ever since I've been on the board, and I live just north of Holly Springs, but all of that area has complained there's not enough traditional capacity south and east and west of 55. So this has been a long and ongoing conversation. So I think it's just a little, to say that we didn't talk about it soon enough, I think is just not quite correct. Facilities is responding to community discussions that have been ongoing for 5 to 8 years.
Now I don't know why we're in this circumstance then.
So when we
It
first,
doesn't make sense.
What's next year going to bring us?
Because as soon as it's
Exactly.
going to open tomorrow,
Which is what
you
we're
get the
doing.
people coming out who don't change me now.
People.
The long-term conversation is not being heard.
So what I hear you all saying is when we have this year-long discussion, we are not going to kick the can down the road. We're not going to pretend not to have these conversations. We're not going to wait till the last minute, which means we're all taking notes on the things that are our priorities and our core values around how we move forward. Because I don't disagree with you, Dr. Martin. We've all had these conversations. My point is we've inserted a lot of our core values and conversations at the tail end of this enrollment discussion. Not that we haven't had them before. I mean in the context of helping the community understand why we are sitting here struggling over the calendar. So I do put the onus on me, all of us, that we have to have these conversations up front. I think Ms. Cash has said it a million times to me. We have to know where we are as a board. Then we can talk about enrollment, because then we're better able to relay to the community what our perspective is, which also actually helps us hear their perspective as well. Because otherwise we're kicking down the road. We feel like we're on the fence, and that's all I'm saying. So I'm not disputing we haven't had the conversation, but we have not had all of these in the context of this enrollment. I'm sorry, Scott.
there's so much in this feedback, and I've heard from a lot of you, of the proximity, that they want a school that they, whatever the calendar is, that they want a school that they feel community ownership in, and they want to have, that seems to be the most important thing. I am bothered by the fact that we have 350 kids that are in a year-round school that will now go to a traditional. That's going to rock their world. However, when did we, tell me the date of draft one?
September 19th.
September 19th.
September 19th. And when that came out and we said, these are the schools that are going to go to Buckhorn, we did not get, unless I didn't hear, this huge group of people saying, no, whoa, wait, you're sending me from a year-round school to a traditional school. It wasn't until we had that conversation 6 weeks, 8 weeks later. You may have, because it's you had some. that we've had, what I feel is this uproaring of 200 families, again, focused on what my individual needs are. The key, and it's always going to be the key, whether this is a traditional school or a year-round school, whoever's in that applicant pool and becomes the principal of that school sets the culture and the tone and who they hire. And while they may be unhappy with the calendar, they're going to care a lot about the educational quality that's in that building. And life doesn't always give us what we want in calendar, but the quality of what their children are going to receive in that school has got to be of the highest priority. I feel like that really bothers me. But I think what we do in that school is more important. And I would probably end up, if you asked me that I had to vote today, I would probably say, let's keep it traditional. That's what we told people we were going to do. This has come in later. And when I look at the map and I look at the surrounding and what the choices are, and families keep saying, I want a school that is accessible for me, that I can get to without going over miles and miles, then it needs to be traditional as planned.
All right.
That's my two
I was doing my
cents.
little tickler, so I was trying to make sure I had Mr. Sutton. Sorry, Ms. Hartstein. I was trying to make sure I got my tickler. Okay, traditional.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, and
We-
thank
we
you all
actually
for
have- we have
celebrating. We
reflected
know
on
it's not an easy decision.
It's not.
Oh, I know. That's
Got
why.
some more stuff to go.
I know. That's why I was trying to get us some consensus.
But as you said, it's
So here
important.
at Apex Friendship Middle, and we've, yes, and we've touched on this already. The only changes here in draft 3 are this particular area here that was assigned to Apex. We're now proposing that it's signed to Lufkin Road. And again, that gives them a more proximate school, and it also aligns their KE calendars.
Touch one more time on why that school is opening so low. Do we not have other land in that area, or
Which school?
Friendship?
Apex
Middle?
Friendship?
Yeah.
There's high growth in this particular area. You can see by Olive Chapel, the area that's specifically right there in Scotts Ridge. There will be growth here. This school will fill up.
So this is us taking a proactive measure in anticipation of growth that's coming rather than a reactive measure of
That's
growth
correct.
that's already there.
And here are the numbers that break down. And again, we talked about trying to get Apex Middle School there again. Ms. Mahaffey, you brought that up, and this would do that for 18-19, get them under 100% based on this particular move.
I don't want to see that school capped in the next 5 years or longer.
Neither do we.
Yes.
10 years, 15.
Okay. All right, and then looking to South Garner High School. South Garner High School, this attendance area would remain the same as we had proposed in draft 1. A lot of the feedback we had been getting from parents dealt with the grandfathering rules, and we'll touch on that again later, but we felt that this attendance area was the one that we had kind of landed on between drafts 1, 2, and 3. And these are the capacity numbers and the academic proficiency. Skipping ahead to the YMCA school, there was brief discussion on this. This is a school that's going to be opening in 1920. And this base attendance area here includes some of Rogers Lane and some of a satellite area from Harris Creek, with the blue, the dark blue line being the application area for this particular school.
It's going to help Rogers Lane.
Yes, yes. And then just slide 20, going back to some of the moves that we had recommended to remove. We just wanted to bring those up again. Increasing the base attendance area for Adams and East Cary, as well as changing the application areas for the East Cary, Salem, Lufkin Road area. We had decided to put those moves off until we can look at a more closer discussion in this particular area. We will be opening Austin Ridge Middle School and Parkside Elementary, so in 1920, so we feel like starting those conversations in January, February.
A lot to
like you
do,
said.
a lot to do.
Oh, a lot to do.
So roll your sleeves up, you'll be seeing a lot of me.
We like that.
We're going to be in close proximity.
Okay, and then Brooks Elementary, there's a move that we had, moving a portion of Green Elementary into Brooks, and we're requesting that we continue to keep that move as proposed in draft 1.
I have a question on that. When we move these students, how many students are we talking about approximately?
Approximately 100.
And will Brooks lose their art or music rooms?
That's not fully defined just yet. Staff went out there, took a look at the building
Yes.
about a week or so ago. That is an option. It is not the only option. They'll be crowded like most of our elementary schools are crowded, that are having to make some choices about whether they use smaller rooms for smaller groups of students, or if they use a larger room if they need it and put art or music or something like that on a cart. That'll be a school level decision once we actually see what the numbers look like.
And is there any discussion that there would be lots of combination classes, or there would be lots of doubled classrooms, like 32 first graders with 2 teachers?
Again, that is an option that some schools are choosing already, that the principal could choose. I mean, if the principal wanted to take a first grade class where you're supposed to have 16 and if she had a large room that she'd rather put 30 in order to not use the art classroom, that would be a principal decision at the school level. I think part of that concern is coming from the fact that this year, Brooks, which opened with the number of classrooms that weren't being utilized as they came back, and the school had a larger capacity that will be eaten up by the K-3 changes as well as the kids coming in. They do have one combo class this year, so I think there's a concern that there will be more of those, and that just depends on what choices are made about what spaces are available for classrooms. There's no way to predict that.
Yeah, so they would be, with these additional students, would simply be pretty much in the same predicament that all of our other elementaries are facing in terms of how do we manage and what choices do we make.
Correct.
In order to accommodate this.
They're just getting into it sooner because it includes a piece of reassignment as well as the K-3.
Thank you.
Ms. Kushner?
And I had an additional question. Right now, Brooks is a 2A magnet, so there have some set-asides for students from lower performing nodes and catchment areas. So I'm assuming with this move, they would move to just being a regular Group 2 magnet. Is that in the works, that
I think,
they will not need any set-asides?
That is what we have discussed with the magnet office. We're going to, right now Brooks is already about 30% magnet. I don't know what percent of that 30 comes from the 2A priority. So we're going to take a look at that, but that would be our assumption, and that's what we have discussed doing, yes.
Anything else?
Well, I do continue to hear concerns from parents about the capacity issue, so I appreciate that staff is looking at options both at Green as well as at Brooks. I know Green also is having an additional 2 regional programs located there, so that, because it looks like on the data sheet that Green is not going to be fully utilized, but my assumption is both these schools are going to be at a fuller capacity, with Green having some room to expand their magnet seats, because they're not at 30% magnet.
Brooks Green is at 11% magnet, so they need additional space for magnet, and they do have some regional programs coming.
Because they both should have a similar magnet proportion.
Yes.
I mean, that Covey program is stellar.
Yes. And they have the Mandarin and the Spanish. I think once they have more capacity, they will be able to grow that magnet program, so that both of these schools can be vibrant magnet schools.
And Green's got a beautiful building that helps them with their magnet recruitment. They saw a bump up in their magnet applications this year and the number of students assigned, so we're hoping that that's going to continue.
And their location
Gorgeous
is
building.
ideal.
Except for today, because it's a ham jam, but otherwise.
A ham jam, not Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah.
Too close to honey ham.
I just got the ham jam today.
Come up to
That's
work
right.
on
But I want to
6 Forks
reiterate
Road.
my thanks to staff for giving serious evaluation of the capacity concerns that the parents are having.
Thank you.
All right, and so then we get into the proposed grandfathering rules that we had addressed earlier, and these go back to draft 2 changes that we had presented. Grades 5 and 8 would be eligible to grandfather with their siblings for 1 year, okay? And grandfathering would include no district transportation. And then for high school, existing to an existing school, all students in grades 9, 10, and 11 would be able to request a grandfather. Their siblings would also be able to grandfather with them. And then from an existing school to a new school, South Gardner High School, which opens with only grades 9 and 10, the 11th and 12th graders would be assigned to their current base high school, so their siblings would be allowed to grandfather with them or request a transfer. And all of the grandfathering requests should be submitted during the request for transfer period, which is February 20th through March 6th. And those will all be done online.
Repeat that one more time.
And
Yep.
Gardner Magna is their magnet.
Yes, that will be their magnet option. And the request for school transfer period, again, for families is February 20th through March 6th.
And the magnet application period is?
January 12th through January
I need
31st.
a sticker so I don't forget
I
this.
think we
The
need
year-round
something
application will be at the same time.
I do, I need it somewhere.
I'm on board.
We have timelines in our office and online, we can send them out.
That
So
would
the
work.
existing to new school for South Garner is, those are the parameters that we have used in the past. So we did not make any changes there. As a part of the review, I'm just taking a shot across the bow. As a part of the review that we bring back to you, we will include the potential for whether or not that may need to change with an earlier discussion looking at green level because of the severe crowding of the high schools in that part of the county.
Oh, good point. All right.
I want to also clarify at this meeting, there's some confusion if you are, like the Abbots Creek people that are being moved back to the Durant Road base, they actually don't, they're actually being told they're at Fox Road, right?
That is correct. Their assignment strips will show that they are assigned to Fox Road based on this move.
Even though they're in the Durant Road base.
Correct.
So they actually don't apply to a year-round since it's their base, they do a transfer.
That is correct. So if they're
That's
requesting,
confusing to
so when families want to apply back to their base, whether it's a traditional calendar school or a year-round school, they would always apply during the request for transfer period, February 20th through March 6th.
So that might happen to Sycamore Creek too. They may actually have done calendar option out and being based back to a year-round school, but they can't apply to that year-round school. They're going to have to do a transfer to that year-round school, even though it's a base.
And back to base.
is different than
And
transfer.
back to base.
Back to base is
Unless the
guaranteed
school's
if you
capped.
do it
Yeah,
in that.
unless the school is capped, the back to base is guaranteed.
So in my district, if I have a student, for the students that are at Olive Chapel that are being moved, their calendar option is being moved to
It's your
Salem,
base.
and they're in the Scotts Ridge base.
This is the first time we've
If
been
they
February 20th.
request to go back, we're going to see in a couple minutes that Scotts Ridge is being recommended. What are they looking at? It will be okay until Scotts Ridge hits their capping number.
Right.
Yeah, because all of the families that are living there currently right now are living there prior to the cap date. So
Okay.
they will all be allowed to go back to their base school.
Okay, so it's based on when you lived there before or after the capping period?
So,
Okay.
so what happens when you request back to base and the school is capped? The school's data manager gets a list of those students, and then they will contact those families to check with them to get their 2 proofs of residence to show that they're currently living where they are right now, and then also to check to see if they've lived there in their home prior to the cap date. And if so, if they meet both of those requirements, then they will be able to go to the cap school at that time.
Okay, and my last question for this, if I live in the Lufkin base, my calendar choice is going from Apex Middle to Friendship Middle, and I'm at Apex Middle, when my assignment strip comes, will it send me back to base, or will it send me to Friendship Middle?
We would assign them to their calendar option, so if they were at Apex, we would assign them to Apex Friendship Middle
Okay, so that they
School.
won't have to reapply to be at, okay.
And if parents see that anything doesn't look correct to them on their assignment strips, they can always contact the Office of Student Assignment. We'll be more than happy to help explain.
They'll probably
So
call
those
you.
strips go out,
They'll probably call you.
Assignment
I'll
strips
send
will go
them
out
one.
January 4th. Track 4 will go out prior to Christmas
Put that on a
break. I think
sticker
it's like
on
the
the-
17th or 18th of December. And we're also working with communications to provide online assignment strips for families so they can log in through Power School, kind of like they can
Oh,
see
that's good.
transportation through there. And we're going to do that as well for assignment strips, so families will not be relying on a paper. that's at
Multimedia,
home.
I appreciate that.
Yes, that's good.
Heard you loud and clear.
And the assignment strips will have all of what we just discussed?
All of the information, timelines,
It has the
application
school they're
period.
assigned to, the transportation type that they'll be assigned as well.
And And when is kindergarten registration?
It begins on January 4th at the base school.
Same day. We can, might be able
Folks,
to
this is
remember.
2018, 19.
That's right.
Okay. Right, and then just looking at our calendar, we're here on the 21st. We have our public hearing tonight, and then the 28th is set aside as a tentative date to meet if you wish to do so. I know my wife wishes we don't because
No
we're
rehashing.
working through Thanksgiving. But if you'd like to, we have it set aside for you. And then December 5th, we'll present the final draft for your approval. Any questions?
You're very brave, Glenn. I would have skipped over that 28th to give us another
That's all right.
opportunity to revisit this. Very brave.
Okay.
To come back.
All right.
Part 2. Go.
Yes, it's just a continuation.
Okay.
You need a binder. Kathy's got one.
Kathy's got her
That was-
binder.
I got my
that was a good idea.
binder. I
That was actually a good idea.
I'm the queen of notebooks.
I am too.
And Kizzy Barker used to tease me. It is, I had my little
Or it's
shelf.
OCD. I have a ton. Everything's kept, and I have all the spines. I have bookcases. They're all noted what they are.
I have a lot of smart notebooks from the training programs.
The biggest binder clip down there.
I was like, do you want it or not? I was like,
Here you go. Maybe
No,
you can
that's
see
not
it your
true.
pile.
She have to split it with that one.
She's got 2 here.
Oh, she got two. Okay, good job. You could also probably get a rubber band. I bet that's one. So you get your.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are back with capping recommendations. We did share this with the Facilities Committee last week, and now we're bringing it to you all, the full board, for your comments and responses. Obviously, we have criteria for determining capping. I don't know how to- Oh, Glenn, do you mind? Excuse me. This is capping criteria that you saw even earlier this fall when we were making additions to this year's cap total. Obviously, the first bullet there is what we are really responding to with elementary schools. And the others, of course, follow those considerations. The capping recommendations we have for you this day is to expire capping at Apex Middle School, mainly because of Apex Friendship opening. And we have really not been capping out students. We've been able to manage with the base growth there. And Inlow High School. We do want to continue with all of the other currently capped schools for this year, starting with the 4 you see listed on this slide: Bailiwick, Carpenter, Cedar Fork, and Combs. Fuquay Varina, Harris Creek, Holly Grove, and Mills Park. And you'll see an asterisk here where we are going to share, Glenn mainly, some other options for overflow schools. You had some questions about that at the Facilities Committee. Olive Chapel. Try not to talk away from you all here. Sycamore Creek, Vance, Willow Springs. And again, Sycamore Creek one we'll also talk about with other options. And Fuquay Varina High School, Heritage High School, Mills Park Middle School, and Panther Creek High School. And Reedy Creek Middle School, Rogers Lane, Scotts Ridge, and Wendell are new schools that we would like to add capped for 2018-19. The 3 elementaries you see here, again, in response to the legislative mandate for reduced class sizes. And Reedy Creek Middle, because of their success with their magnet program, has seen a huge increase in their 6th grade.
I'm holding that dear for all of our magnets.
Wow.
I really am.
They have a much larger base attending their base school population.
Yes.
It too.
So they will keep
two
their
things,
base as
okay.
well.
Yeah. So we want to really keep a handle on that because they couldn't sustain that kind of increase for the next 2 grades. And then, with comments and additional information from Glenn, we will bring this back to you on December 5th, hopefully for approval. So Glenn, we'll switch over, and you can talk about the maps.
Okay. Right, so you asked us to look at several schools, and I had 5 marked specifically to bring back, whether they were overflowing to a school that was an ESM school or it had a different calendar. And so what I've done is I've just created some maps here so you can see. The first one we've got is Fuquay Elementary, which is down here in red. To look at this map, all of the schools are located with a flag. Okay, the green represents a school that has a capacity that's projected to be under 100%. Red would be over 100%. So looking at this particular area, Fuquay Elementary, the current overflow option for Fuquay Elementary is Lincoln Heights. Okay? And that is an ESM school. It's a new magnet school as well. And so, you know, it was brought up at the, I believe it was Policy Committee. Facilities Committee, sorry. That they wanted us to look at that and look at what other options we could have. So we shared with Transportation what would be some alternative options for an overflow school. You know, Buckhorn Creek could possibly be an option. Again, Transportation just wasn't very clear about what who the students would be attending there, so they would need to have some further time to look at the transportation routes for that. But then after that, you know, you've got Holly Ridge, which is over 100% capacity. Oak View, which looks like it has seats, but it really doesn't. We just added 4 trailers for the growth of that particular area. So they wouldn't be a recommended option as an overflow. And as you can see, we're starting to get much further away from Fuquay, looking at Apex, Swift Creek, or Vandora Springs, which is just, the bus ride times are not appropriate. They're not proximate in this particular area.
Can we make Buckhorn Creek the primary?
So there's a dilemma with that. So any students who are capped out of Lincoln Heights, we would need to move them to Buckhorn Creek, because we do not want to recommend having 2 different overflow schools for, you know, it just wouldn't be efficient with regards to.
We're going to wind up capping kids out of Lincoln Heights this year? That's what you said.
No, I'm just saying, if you want to change Lincoln Heights as not being the overflow for Fuquay, staff would prefer to have those students who are attending there as an overflow go with all of the new students who would be overflowed to Buckhorn Creek, if that's your suggestion. Otherwise, we're recommending not to have 2 different overflows, because
So there's currently 6 students.
I believe
Actually, there's only 2 that are capped out to Lincoln Heights. One's a kindergartner, and one's a 5th grader who will be gone next year.
Really?
Now, that was as of last week. I don't know if any more have been capped out in the past.
So essentially, either over winter break or over the summer, those kids could get sent back to their.
Well, the concern is with the reduced class size numbers, the cap numbers going down, that may not be as easily assumed as in years past.
Talking about a small enough number, I would rather see us cap to Buckhorn.
Yes. And in terms of dealing with folks who need to get out of multi-track, Buckhorn becomes priority, not Lincoln Heights.
Yes.
Ms. Cash?
So we're not filling up Buckhorn, so we're going to have to reassign out of there, right? We're still not getting it too full.
Well,
I mean,
we're not overfilling it to start because it's the projected growth in that area.
I mean,
will fill
it
over
won't be
time.
overfilled in 2 years, will
With
it?
transfers.
No.
Because I don't
Oh,
want to
no,
get, I don't want to get back into
We're not going to overfill
that.
the transfers, and we're not.
Yeah, I just want to be sure.
I understand what you're saying, yes.
Well, in 2020, E36 opens up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And then I understand, I don't want to move, that we,
I know I don't want to keep moving
I don't wanna
and
keep
opening
moving
new
those either.
schools just to, okay.
Well, Lincoln Heights is 520, including its magnet population. All right, Buckhorn's an 800-student school on traditional, so there's much more available capacity there. And it's an ESM school, and we want to stabilize the population at our ESM schools and get rid of the flux
Yeah.
in order to help them
Yes.
with their academic
I
program.
get that. I just don't want to overfill Buckhorn too soon.
I don't either.
Well, good, we're on the same page.
We're on the same
Good
page.
job. All right.
I mean, looking at, the history here, there haven't been many students capped out, so we could anticipate that there won't be many that will be continued to be capped out.
Maybe they'll choose to go.
So my hearing is staff, a board recommendation to change from Lincoln Heights
To Buckhorn.
to Buckhorn Creek, and then we're going to move the students who are overflowed at Lincoln Heights to Buckhorn Creek. Correct?
Yes.
And I would think that folks who want multi-track can apply for it.
And E35 should help, will help Fuquay
That is correct, in 2020.
in 2020.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, so the kindergartner who's now overflowed from Fuquay Marina is at Lincoln Heights?
Yes,
But that
one
student-
kindergarten.
One kindergartner, I would assume they could apply, stay at Lincoln Heights as a magnet or,
They would have that option. They could apply.
Yeah, I don't want to see this kid go from,
We can, this Office of Student
Lincoln
Assignment can
Heights to
contact his
Buckhorn.
family
Yeah, I
directly
would
and let them.
think
I was just thinking, I was like, can we just do like this call to call one family?
Instead of waiting to see
You
what
cannot be a
happens.
president, but there's one family.
proactive, that's all right, thank you.
We should be able to call them.
All right, so moving to our second
That's right,
map.
we're moving back to the real world.
Old school, we're gonna call you.
I like the old way.
The school we're proposing an enrollment cap in this particular area is Wendell. Now, this school has not capped any students out yet. This is just a proposal. But in our recommendation, there was some conversations around the Overflow school not being of the same calendar. So Wendell Elementary is the school that's proposed to be capped. Staff had originally recommended Carver Elementary as the Overflow school, which is on a modified calendar. We had sent information to Transportation for them to review it. Looking at this, Carver is currently an application school for Wendell, so we currently have buses already running in this particular area. So that would be the most efficient for staff to continue that. Even though this Overflow would be a different calendar, we can work on the callback dates and make it so that it aligns best with the students not losing any instructional time. So staff recommendation would be to prefer to keep this as is.
Yep.
We did have another alternative option of going to Zebulon, but staff's recommendation would be to stick with Carver.
Yeah.
Good? Okay.
We're good.
So the next school we're looking at is Rogers Lane. Again, this is a brand-new school to our list of being capped, and it is a brand-new school. So Rogers Lane, we currently have Hodge Road as the proposed overflow. And again, just like in Wendell's case, again, the staff recommendation is that Hodge Road remain the overflow option because of the fact that Hodge Road, even though it's an ESM school, it does have application. It is an application area for Rogers Lane, so there are already buses running in that particular area.
But I thought we said we wouldn't do ESMs
Yeah.
as an overflow.
That
Which we just talked about.
that is true.
too.
So
Yeah.
what we can do, we had presented to staff to take a look at Nightdale Elementary as a potential option, and we could make that work if that's your wish.
How far is that? What kind of a bus ride? That looks far.
I've got it right here.
It's not that long. And it's against traffic.
Yeah.
Do you know how far it is?
Well, they wouldn't be going against,
So from the school to the school, it's 7.56 miles.
And they're going
So
against
it's
traffic.
somewhere
I
within
drive
that
this way every
vicinity.
Well, you said it's not a long bus ride.
Once, the long part is loading the bus, once you're on the bus.
Well, I can't take care of that part.
No.
but it's a great question, and it's not.
I know.
Where it goes, the long time is loading
Yeah.
the bus.
And we raised this in facilities, that it was an ESM school, that we were trying not to.
I guess that's where I just sort of come back to this notion I raised in the last meeting, a couple of meetings ago, kind of got smacked down, but this notion of academic caps, academic enrollment caps, where we're looking at schools that are struggling, like Rogers Lane. We were just looking at its proficiency, and it's under 40%. We're sitting at a capacity of, what was it I was just looking at? it's 860 something, and this enrollment is 840 something.
Yeah, I
Same
think we
with
should look
sort of
at that.
Lincoln Heights. I mean, and I don't know if this is part of the conversation when we get to the targets conversation, but
It is.
when we think about what we can do from an assignment standpoint and looking at student achievement of schools, that to me still seems to be a reasonable trigger when you're looking at a school that's a high-need school that's also at or above capacity. Does that not trigger some sort of move in terms of reducing, student, I guess at the end of the day, how are we maximizing teaching and learning? And it seems that the lower the student population, smaller classes we have, more effective teaching and learning,
So I think
assuming
that's-
what be going on.
I think that's what you suggested in terms of how that becomes a part of the conversation when we finish the ESM portion of the presentation, and if we go ahead and speak about how targets figure into that, and then what does that data kick you into? What does it mean when you have certain characteristics? I think that what you're saying about capping a school that is high needs in the sense of trying to maintain a lower class size ratio in order to serve students in smaller classes is a conversation. It's a conversation that has tentacles because it impacts capacity. Are we lowering the capacity, and can we do that in that area? It does also kick into whether the resources that they earn based on what we're trying to accomplish, if we're looking at a lower class size, actually is earned, which that's one good thing about the K-3 class size legislation is that it will drive down class size if it goes through as it is, which will help those schools.
So when you say that, are you saying resources might diminish because you've got now lower student membership?
In some cases, it would. It would if we do status quo. But if what the discussion that we're having is not status quo,
Right.
in order to address the needs of schools, then yes, then we can do that. I'm just telling you that it's got tentacles.
Which was what my statement was when you talked about capping is, for achievement is, it's a tool, and then I think it's a tool that's not standalone. It's a conversation, that is yet another difficult conversation, but I think we have to have it, and that's what differentiated resources look like, especially if, back to our core principles as board members, is proficiency, our definition, not grades of schools, but what we really want to achieve as a district and what we see as important, then that's the conversation we have to have. And I think it's many tentacles, but I think it's a conversation. In my opinion, I feel like we're there when we're looking at our schools and what can we do for them. That's Monica's opinion. So, in my opinion, it's not at the table. It's a broader conversation that people.
I think it's got to be part of an extended conversation.
I mean, either way, it's a cap. So I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. A cap is a cap, but.
Well, it can be instituted by some things like
The purpose of the cap.
like not making it an overflow school in any circumstances, right?
Yeah.
That becomes a hard line.
Yeah.
Right.
So Rogers, your staff recommendation then is Rogers Lane to Nightdale?
And now it is.
That's the other option.
What's Nightdale's proficiency math? I know it's under, it has capacity, but also, my recollection is that when we drew Rogers Lane's attendance areas, part of, many of those students came from Nightdale as well as.
Well, it was mostly Hodge Road and
Mostly
Barlow
Hodge
Road
Road.
and Walnut Creek. There was a very
Okay.
small portion of
Okay,
Nightdale.
a small group, okay, small portion, yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification.
But to your question, though, Nightdale is above the ESM threshold, but how
Above
far?
the, yeah.
You know,
It's a great, I mean, the
that being
faculty there
said-
is so wonderful.
That being said, I mean, this is that Hodge Road Elementary exceeded growth this past year.
Right.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So,
It is doing great things.
And to your point, Kathy, I think the conversation should be not status quo.
right.
And if we're thinking not status quo, if capacity is the issue in terms of one of those tentacles, then another curveball might be, as we think about capacity and future bond programs, should then student achievement be somewhere factored in where we're thinking about expanding capacity.
Well,
Because then you need that sort of play in areas, particularly when you're in Eastern Wake or Southeast Raleigh,
Right.
where we have our highest number of both high-need schools and experience the most poverty in the county.
Right.
Those areas don't have a lot of growth, but struggle with high-need schools and poverty. So should we
And the
have that
balance
extra
there.
capacity in those areas and look at still building those schools to give us capacity in those areas to be able to do more creative kinds of things?
I
Just
mean, once we determine what those priorities are and what it looks like, it very well could flip a circle into a different part of town than what normal growth does.
I've always said, the bond program shouldn't only just chase, to use your term, chase growth, but how can we also use that?
Fix old schools and put schools where we need lower class
Well,
sizes.
if we got a 600-student school and we want to increase the student-teacher ratio by reducing the number of students to 400, then there are 200 kids we have to find another place for.
Or
That'll
build a
be
school in
academic
that
New
area.
school that you be.
Or build
Yeah,
a
I know. We've had that discussion.
Yeah.
We just never reached a conclusion that we were going to commit to the operational resources to support a student-teacher ratio that made that functional. I'm happy to have that conversation
Come with
and
your
find the
values
resources
next
to
year.
do that.
That's because
Keep
we've
saying
become professional can kickers.
I was taking notes of where I thought people's core values might be. I'm going to write Mr. Sutton says not to kick the can down the road.
So.
So are we
where does the
gonna-
board lie- No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
So what are we doing here
Yeah.
on Nightdale?
Well, they suggested Hodge Road and we suggested Nightdale.
Right.
So you'd like to move forward with Nightdale instead?
I'm saying that
Yes,
because
I'm
we
saying
just
that.
saw the growth in Hodge Road.
It's a little further than what I'd like, but
Let's stabilize them.
Don, how
yeah,
do you
if
feel?
we're not going to do it to one, we need
Don's
not to
district.
another.
All right.
Want to know Don?
I think Hodge Road, from looking at the numbers, it's pretty full, so that probably falls off as being an option if Nightdale's a little bit below. When you said that there was some students moved from Nightdale to Rogers Lane, I would hope that they would be the ones selected to go back to Nightdale.
If they
No,
wanted to.
this would be
If they-
newly,
Well, these are new
enrolled
ones.
students
This is
would be
new
capped
students
out.
coming
It wouldn't be students who are existing.
It's addressing the cap. Right.
But that could be a discussion in our January.
I think it might be helpful just to have Nightdale's information in front of us.
How many we're talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, what their proficiency, so we're not just kind of guessing.
That's what I was trying to look for.
But having,
Oh, this is just,
Got a note already.
All right, so moving on. So Harris Creek is a school that was recently capped on, I think it was October 3rd. Okay, and they have started overflowing students to River Bend, and we can give you that exact number. The issue here is that River Bend is on a different calendar than Harris Creek. However, they are application schools to each other, so we do have buses already running in that particular area.
Can you remind me which one is which?
So this is Harris Creek, it's a multi-track year-round school, and River Bend Elementary is a traditional calendar school.
And Sanford Creek is,
Multi-track year-round.
okay,
Now, the only concern is,
Yeah.
Sanford Creek is,
close to being capped.
it's 104%, it's a multi-track year-round school. It's not ideal, so staff's recommendation would be to keep the existing students who've been capped out, as well as any new students to Harris Creek. And then, we can continue to look at Harris Creek in 1920 or beyond if we need to address their base attendance area if necessary.
So you're recommending keeping it to River Bend? as-
That would be staff's recommendation, yes.
Is that,
How far is it to Durant?
Durant would not be staff's recommendation due to bus ride times, efficiency of routes.
Okay.
And I
This
believe
is-
they're on
this
different
is-
bell schedules as well, which would pose
This
a
is a
problem.
multi-track year-round that would overflow to a traditional.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, and just remember that the last track-in for a multi-track year-round school is around the last week of July. Traditional doesn't let in till August, so you don't really have necessarily that period of time where they're missing school, right? They would, if they're late for
Gotcha,
traditional,
yes,
they'd be missing even more if you put them in a multi-track year-round.
they might actually be happy and say, I don't want to go to year-round. Go ahead,
So
Overflow.
I don't think you have quite the same issue if
Okay.
the overflow is from a multi-track year-round to a traditional.
I can go with
And
that.
it's nearby, proximity.
Okay. So we're okay with leaving this overflow as is? Good. Okay, and this is a very similar issue with Sycamore Creek. This school is currently capped as of October 3rd. Their current overflow is Pleasant Grove. Sycamore Creek is a multi-track year-round school. Pleasant Grove is a traditional school. Same issue with Harris Creek. Again, as Kathy stated, this isn't as big of an issue when it comes to students when they start, and we can work with the schools to develop the appropriate time to call back where the students won't miss instructional time. And again, these are application schools to each other as well, so the operational efficiency is there already.
And there are some students from Sycamore Creek going to Pleasant Union under the enrollment plans application.
So that's Pleasant Union going this way, so that would be bailiwick-based students who are going to be assigned to Pleasant Union now as application
As
students.
applications.
Yeah, and that's why we didn't choose this as an option as well, because we've already got some students going there already.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. That's it. Those are the only schools that we were asked to bring back. Any additional questions? Concerns?
Hearing no questions? All right.
So just to recap, we're going to have Rogers Lane Overflow go to Knightdale, not Hodge. And we're going to have the Fuquay Marina Overflow go to Buckhorn Creek, not Lincoln Heights. We'll make those changes and you'll see that.
And
on the
all
fifth.
others would remain as is.
Knightdale's at 51.2. 51.2.
And we'll provide
Their
academic.
growth was a little bit better than the district average.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
We do. Nice try, Miss Kushner.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we're going to do plans. Thank you.
Definitely should.
I know. Okay, we have some time. So,
I think we need to go and start our closed session.
I think that sounds like a great idea, Mr. Fletcher.
I'd like to make a motion to go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11, A1, A3, and A6, and 115C-319, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privileges provided in GS 143-318.11A3, and to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the board in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the board, and to consult with and instruct board staff or on negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the board on particulars of the acquisition of real property for public infrastructure improvements related to the Buckhorn Creek Elementary School site, and to receive the board's instructions as to the position to be taken on behalf of the board in negotiations in relation thereto.
second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will go into close as soon as clears. Oh, yeah, for sure, though. I know, I was about